Thank you all for coming to the Water Resilient Cities Conference. I don't want to know if I can say first. That would imply we're going to have another one. That would be great, but right now I'm only thinking about today and tomorrow. I'm Wendy Kellogg. I'm the chair of this conference, and I'm the associate dean at the Levin College of Urban Affairs. It's nice to see some friends that I've known for a long time and new acquaintances. We're happy that you're here. I will say that it was probably about 2 years ago that we started thinking seriously about doing this conference. And I was encouraged by someone, I hope I don't embarrass him, I want to recognize him, Mr. Jack Matejka, who's back there from Eaton Corporation, was very supportive and said, why don't you organize something at Cleveland State focused on water? And things took off after that. So thank you, Jack. So the day's finally here, and we have a short introduction from Interim Dean Bob Gleason, who's going to welcome you to the college. I want to also acknowledge, I'm not sure who has yet come in, but we have 5 Cleveland City Council members registered for the conference, which I think is a wonderful accomplishment and appreciate them. I know Mike Polensik is here. We also have Terrell Pruitt. Is he here yet? Marty Kane. Didn't see Marty. Mamie Mitchell and Brian Cummins. So I'm aware of council schedules. Sometimes you're at the mercy of other things happening, but I'm sure they'll come in today and tomorrow, and we really appreciate having those officials here and coming to share their experiences with all of yours. Bob.
Thanks, Wendy. Hope everybody can hear me. My name is Bob Gleason. I have the honor this year as serving as the interim dean of the Maxine Goodman Levin College of Urban Affairs. I always say that the name of the college because we are a college of urban affairs, and that means that we aren't any one thing, right? The college actually started as an interdisciplinary research institute, right? When urban affairs looked like they were going badly outside our door of the relatively new university. And we said to ourselves at that time, I should say we, but I shouldn't say we because I wasn't here at the time, but if we're going to be an urban university, we have to engage the complexity of the urban area that we serve. And although our faculty is filled with people who were educated in particular slices of that complexity. Somebody's a political scientist. I'm an historian by background. Somebody was a civil engineer. Someone was a mathematician. All these different slices of knowledge that we we train ourselves in and we try to impart to students. When we go out the doors of our building and we try to interact with the real world, we understand that all of those slices all get mushed together in the complexity of the real world. But that's the complexity of urban spaces, because urban places are spaces that multiple people use for their own different purposes at the exact same time. And the key to dealing with urban issues and urban problems is to find ways for all of those different people to simultaneously use the same basic place and get along with each other while they're doing, and not preclude each other from each person's use, and to layer one on top. So as a college, we are very interdisciplinary. We seek all sorts of knowledge, the knowledge that comes from formally trained people, sort of the nerds, as my wife likes to call us. But we also know enough to know that type of formalized knowledge isn't sufficient for dealing with the complexity of the real world out there. So every issue we take on, we bring people from the community, we bring people from professional practice, we mix people together. And this room we think of as our living room. And this is the room that we often bring people from multiple perspectives with multiple points of views and multiple types of understanding and knowledge, and we bring them here and we ask them to mix it all up in a pot and help us inform and improve the way we deal with problems that define the quality of life in urban spaces, in urban places. That's who we are, right? So this conference, I go through that a little bit just so that you understand that who we are is expressed in what this conference is. And when Wendy originally told me about this conference, gee, Bob, if you're going to be interim dean this year, this is going on, I was so happy that we were doing it, because I can't imagine a more complex issue with different types of knowledge. What do these lakes mean? How do they work? How do we think about how they work? And what are the multiple ways that different people give them meaning? They're places of commerce, they're places of recreation, they're places of just spectacular beauty. They're places of sometimes really ugly when the water's low. We were just talking, well, the water's low and there's all that kind of half-dead stuff. Yeah, but that's habitat, right? That's habitat. So you leave it alone. It has all of these complexities all at the same time. And add to that the fact that our climate is changing, and it is an exactly kind of messy issue that we hope as a college to contribute to understanding how we manage it. Can we inform and improve the way we go about managing this tremendous asset of the Great Lakes? So we thank you for coming into our living room. We welcome you into our living room, and it has good coffee too. And we hope that you benefit from sharing information with each other, from learning, from identifying what we don't yet know. I always take that from conferences. I always appreciate it. I keep my little list of things that I never thought of that, or that's important, and geez, there isn't any one person in this room that even claims that they know about that yet. Those are really interesting places to start digging in. So we hope to stimulate your thinking, and we hope to focus it in a way where, especially we have elected officials here, which is wonderful, that's what we do, that we can put some of that knowledge into action quickly. So thank you for coming, and we hope you really enjoy the time. And I'll be in and out, because as dean, I'm supposed to go to, I've got 3 other things on campus I'm supposed to go to today, but I will be in and out, and I hope to have a chance to meet as many of you individually as possible. So, Wendy, off to you.
Thank you, Bob. All right, this is a new technology for me, so I'm hoping it works. I'm the guinea pig, guys. Watch what I have to do. Whoops, that's not right. There we go. Oh, okay, it's a light touch. Bob? Well, honest, yes, it's a very light touch. All right, the purpose of this conference, making connections. We're thinking of it both geographically across areas of professional practice and urban water professionals to urban sustainability managers and planners. We're hoping we explore some innovative management frameworks and practices, which you'll hear about in just a few minutes. Deepen our understanding of interdependencies among water infrastructure, land, economies, and governance, and identify some vulnerabilities about climate and how we can respond, and what we already have that will help us respond, and what new opportunities are going to come forward. The distribution of the results, we're going to be gathering lots of notes over the next 2 days, asking you to do some thinking. It will be distributed through several means. We're videotaping the presentations this morning. There will be all the PowerPoints given over the next 2 days will be on our college website eventually. And then we also plan a white paper that will summarize everything that you have said and suggested. We're hoping to do a professionally designed report that will be distributed more broadly, pending some funding that we've asked for. And I'm hoping to organize some future convenings with some additional fundraising. And then eventually, the hope is, as Jack knows, to create a water-focused program of some sort or center here at CSU. Okay, we have 140 people registered for the conference. I don't think there's quite that many right now, but I know people will come and go. I'm not going to read all the places, but you can see it's quite a wide range of states, even from outside the Great Lakes, and a very wide range of experts, which is exactly what we hoped for. We spent a lot of time reaching out in a targeted way to find people who know something about these issues to come and have a conversation. So you are the experts. You are the people who manage human systems and conduct projects and do research in key water and land sectors. We all need your wise decisions and actions over the next couple decades to ensure water in the Great Lakes is stewarded as natural conditions change. And that's really why we wanted to organize this conference, was to get your feedback on how things are working and bring you together to have some conversations about what we might expect and learn from each other. So why the resilient part? Okay, you have to indulge me for 2 minutes as the professor. I just want to set this up a little bit. You can read those two definitions. I don't have to read them for you. But they are from two fields. Hillary Brown will be here later today at the Levin Forum program, which is part of the conference. The first definition is more from the folks who have been working on ecological resilience for the last several decades, and they are listed there. So let me look at a few of those key concepts. So the first is socio-ecological systems, and that basically means human and natural systems are together in a large, complex, adaptive, co-evolving system that have reciprocal relationships. And cities are one type of SES. The Great Lakes is another type of SES, a complex adaptive system, and it would be such whether it had human beings in it or not. But here we are. So the second big concept is, what are the qualities of these systems? We need to think about scale and hierarchy. And there is a sense of nestedness in how these systems function, symbolized by the bigger and smaller dots on the chart. These system components are all subsystems of a larger part of the system, and the higher scale controls the smaller, but disruption in one subsystem can spread to higher and lower levels, sometimes quite quickly. So that's an important concept to keep in mind as you share your stories. There is an acknowledgement of nonlinearity, meaning that manipulation, either through natural processes or human intervention, may result in outcomes of unexpected magnitudes. For example, one small change in the source of drinking water led to a very dramatic change in the socio-ecological system in Flint, Michigan. Another quality of these complex systems is emergence, where properties or behaviors in the system are not easily explained by understanding at one level, one part of the system. Systems self-organize, and the information that flows through the system is sometimes difficult for us to appreciate, but we need to try to think at different scales and different parts of the system simultaneously. No system can be understood or managed by focusing on a single scale. The last concept is adaptiveness, which simply means constant reorganization of systems to respond to external environments. So, two nifty diagrams. I don't know if any of you are familiar with these, but this tells us how systems change. There are disruptions that exist in the world in which the system exists, and there are vulnerabilities, and all systems experience these. The question is, at what scale does the disruption occur, and does the disturbance cascade into higher or lower levels of the system itself? The level of resistance to change in terms of thresholds is important, whether there's tipping points or capacity that the disruption is so great. This suggests how the system will respond to these disruptions, or in fact changes that human beings might decide to cascade into the system. If we think of the system as a ball in a basin, as the diagram on the left shows you, that basin could be good or bad. We have a deep basin about poverty in the United States, right? The disturbance can push the ball into another basin, which means that the system has adapted and responded. And it allows the system to reconfigure and reach a new, albeit probably temporary, relative stability. And this happens over and over again in large, complex systems. The human role in adaptive management is to preserve ecosystem resilience, the best that we know how, so that those systems can adapt and try not to harm them, of course. And one key part of that strategy is to make sure we are always enhancing the ecological, physical, and social working capital of the system, which is the basis of being able to adapt, having that little bit of capital that helps you move forward. Social capital is the knowledge that we have and that we've developed over time, mixed with some innovation and novelty, that allows us to remember what came before and use tools that worked before in the current situation. You can see that remember on the diagram of this socio-ecological water system. Ecological capital, clearly it's what we seek to steward, and that allows the system itself to continue to organize and produce ecosystem services that we need. That's done through creating feedback loops that provide decision support, build capacity to understand what is happening in ecosystems, and what we have to learn what we can modify and what we should leave alone. And this hopefully increases our capacity to adapt our own governance systems to respond to this improving knowledge about climate change and water. So resilience is a measure of system performance. But I want to stress it's not just about bouncing back after a big disruption like a hurricane or a big storm. The system could also begin to transform itself, to reconfigure into some new state. And sometimes the disruption is so powerful that that in fact is what happens. Or something is so attractive that we decide to reorganize the system because we have intention and we can do that. And so natural or human systems are transformed. And this can be beneficial or detrimental, but it is in part why the feedback loops and knowledge we're building is so critical, so we can understand how the system functions. For example, a detrimental tipping point, if we think of the return of harmful algal blooms to the western Lake Erie Basin, which existed all over Lake Erie when I was a child, you didn't go in the water to swim when I was a child along Lake Erie's beaches. But their return in the western basin is a combination, a very complex combination, to at least the way I understand it, of long-term effects of invasive species, changing water chemistry, increased water warming, coupled with human practices in terms of agriculture, plowing up to the edge of streams, and high levels of nutrients being used by farmers. The tipping point in terms of the urgency in which we consider the system was HABs coming into the intake for Toledo's drinking water. That's what got everybody's attention more broadly than the scientists who study algal blooms. We still haven't addressed that cascade, but we're working on it, and the system is responding. An example of a beneficial transformation that was intentional is restoration of water quality in the Cuyahoga and Lake Erie has allowed for a transformation of an industrial river and a commercial river and waterfront to one that shares these functions. We have not gotten rid of our port, and we don't want to get rid of our port, but we're learning how to share functions of the river with boaters, bathers, entertainment districts. We're also restoring natural wetlands and ecological function in parts of the system. So this is a human-induced change, transformation of a system, and one could argue has transformed both the social and ecological aspects of the system. So the last slide, if we think about urban resilience, what does all this mean for cities? We need to take into account the different ways these subsystems work, interact, and influence each other. And water is present in each one of these systems through metabolic flows in the built environment, in social dynamics and how we use and appreciate water, and how we manage water through our governance networks. Why bring these things together? You're going to hear about a lot of these connections over the next 2 days. The great amount of interdependencies between these different facets of urban life and what that means for Great Lakes cities. In all cases, the mission and purpose varies in terms of the organization itself and the extent that they consider water explicitly. And yet they make decisions that affect, these organizations make decisions that affect every other piece of that system. And the idea we're hoping to foment here is that failure to consider what's happening in the rest of the system and at different levels can precipitate problems throughout the whole system, and knowledge of the conditions in the rest of the system can hopefully precipitate innovation and shared opportunities to move benefits through the system itself. And that's largely done by bridging across organizations, and that's really what you're doing here and what we're thinking about having you do. These are the citations of the pictures. I didn't make them up. Some very bright people did. All right, so I'd like to now, we'll move into the plenary session. And if perhaps our guests would come up to the front and they can see if they've figured out how to run this little clicker. Yeah, thank you. What I'm going to do is introduce each of them now so that we don't have to stop in between. And we'll go in order that they're seated. So we're very happy to have these three people who are known very well throughout the Great Lakes Basin and nationally for the work they've been doing in very different aspects of the Great Lakes and water and all kinds of water. Elizabeth Gibbons is the director of the Climate Center at the Graham Institute of Sustainability at the University of Michigan. You have bios for these people in your program, but I wanted to call out a couple things for each of them. In her role there, she's also the program manager for U of M's Great Lakes Integrated Science and Assessment Center, or GLISA, which is funded by NOAA and one of the regional centers in the United States. And for the last several years, the Climate Center had been working on the Great Lakes Adaptation Assessment for cities, and that's one of the reasons I wanted Beth to come. She's going to here primarily to talk about the lakes, but she understands how those lakes are affecting cities. She holds a graduate degree in urban and regional planning from the University of Michigan and has worked in the United States and Africa on a myriad of natural resources management and community issues. John Austin directs the Michigan Economic Center at Prima Civitas Foundation, and he is spearheading the Michigan Dream Restored initiative to develop citizen-informed strategies for supporting Michigan's foundational assets, public goods that drive the economy. In 2006, Mr. Austin created and directed the Great Lakes Economic Initiative for the Brookings Institution, where he authored several reports about the Great Lakes and their economies, the Vital Center, the Vital Connection, and Healthy Waters Strong Economy, which led to federal support for Great Lakes cleanup and restoration, along with other initiatives. In his spare time, Mr. Austin is also president of the State of Michigan's Board of Education. So, yeah, good luck with that. Carol Howe has over 30 years of global experience in urban water issues. She has a comprehensive knowledge of water, wastewater, and stormwater service delivery, I can attest. Over dinner last night, we had a great conversation about those things, with a lot of experience in research, planning, treatment plant operations, and construction management. She started her career in residuals management at the Allegheny County Sanitary Authority in our sister city of Pittsburgh area. Oh, good, no big reaction. Ms. Howe worked with UNESCO for several years in the Netherlands, managing the European Union's global research project called SWITCH, Sustainable Water Management in the City of the Future. A fabulous project. If you can go online and Google it, it's wonderful. She was also the director of the Australian government's Future Cities program and manager of strategic planning for the Sydney water system. She recently co-authored a report on pathways to one water a guide for institutional innovation for the Water Environment Research Foundation. So each speaker will have 20 to 25 minutes, and if we have time, hopefully, we'll be able to take a few questions from the audience for our guests. And Elizabeth. Okay. So it's a really light touch. You have to point it right at the thing.
That is light. Great. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Wendy, so much for this invitation, and it's a pleasure to get to be here and trying to cover a lot of information in this talk, providing a bit of this climate change overview, also talking about some of the impacts from climate change on water in our cities, and then also getting to how do we act through uncertainty? What are the kind of questions we need to ask in order to make sure climate information is usable and useful? And then how do we also recognize our own ability to cope with uncertainty and move into a decision-making space through that uncertainty? Just a little bit of background on how we got where we are right now talking about climate change. So this is just the very basic kind of carbon cycle. As we know, carbon cycles through our system in a natural way. There's a natural carbon in and carbon out through our oceans, through our natural environments, our landscapes. But of course, we see where there's this additional carbon output going into our atmosphere, really driven by our fossil fuels and by our land use choices. That lands us in a place here where we've heard about quite a lot recently of 400 parts per million, 400, wow, I just realized I have slides right in front of me. There's slides right here. Yeah, this is great. This got so much easier. Awesome, sorry. So we know that there's a natural change in the carbon concentration in our atmosphere, and what we're showing in this slide is the x-axis is actually giving us thousands of years, and it shows how this concentration of carbon dioxide has gone up and down. As we often hear, there's a natural cycle. However, what we've suddenly seen in just the last really 120 years, 150, 120 years is this tremendous spike, which has led us up to the 400 parts per million. And you might see almost off the table is where that red arrow is, pointing out what is 400 parts per million versus what our natural cycle has been over the course of hundreds of thousands of years. What does that mean when we think about it here in the Great Lakes region? Over the last 100 years, our temperature, we've seen an average change of about 2 degrees Fahrenheit. We've seen much of that change coming in the winter and overnight lows. So seeing winter temperatures rising and overnight lows not dipping as far as they used to. Ooh. We've seen an increase in heat waves, and of course, we know that average changes are important, but what we really know impact our system are where we get into our extremes. And so we've seen this gradual increase in heat waves, about one more heat wave per year in the Chicago area, about 2 more per year in the Detroit area, just over the last 50 to 60 years. And as we look forward, this is taking data from the National Climate Assessment and recreating national climate assessment maps for the Great Lakes region and looking at a mid-century period, so 2040 to 2070, actually very reasonable time frame. We're thinking about a planning horizon, if you will. When we think about our systems and what do we plan for when we put infrastructure in place, 40 years, 70 years. I come from Ann Arbor, Michigan, from UM, and so kind of basing it out of there, we're thinking about 25 to 35 more days on average over 90 degrees. Versus 71 to 2000, and 5 to 10 days over 95 degrees more as we look just to mid-century. When we think about precipitation, we've seen an 11% increase over the Great Lakes region over the last 100 years. Some areas have seen a much more marked increase in precipitation. specifically calling back to my hometown again, Ann Arbor, we've seen a 45% increase in precipitation there. I mean, it's just tremendous. So it really is varied. And again, the average is one story, but when we think about our systems, the compelling story is when we consider the extreme precipitation. So we see these precipitation events coming in heavier storms, an increase in that top 1%. And this is really the calling card of climate change for the Northeast and for the Midwest region, where we've seen a 71% increase in these severe storms in the Northeast and 37% in the Midwest. A little map that we put together, we just wanted to highlight what these extreme precipitation events look like spot by spot. So this is derived from local climate stations. So, when you go on to AccuWeather or Wonderground and you say, I want to see not just the weather for Cleveland, but you can actually pull up your individual weather station. This is data that's derived from quality controlled stations where we're looking at what has been the change at that station in the extreme precipitation events. And just driving home that, these changes are, especially with precipitation, really local experiences and experiences we can dive into and give you a very, really kind of exact look at your local space when we consider the change up till now. What we've also seen in terms of the precipitation change is really a change in seasonality. So with the shorter winters, we've seen more precipitation falling as rain rather than snow. Where we've seen the lakes themselves having warmer surface temperatures, we've seen a reduced snow accumulation, but more precipitation events off the lakes because they're open longer. So when those lakes are open, not frozen over, you see more precipitation come off them, so increasing your total precipitation, but potentially less as snow. As we look out into the future, precipitation is more difficult to model. It's more fickle than temperature. So overall, we see an annual 5 to 20 degree estimated change, but this is really varied when we kind of dig into the seasonality of it. So we see this dichotomy, which many of us have experienced, of less water when you need it, more water when you don't, wet springs, wet falls, but dry summers. And how do we cope with that as we prepare our fields, as we prepare our cities, as we prepare our systems? And we expect to see more of that coming out. So drier summers, but wetter springs, wetter falls. The lakes themselves, really a bellwether for where we're headed overall in the region. The lakes are warming more rapidly than the air. So while we saw that 2-degree average change in air temperature, the surface temperature of Lake Superior has increased 4.5 degrees. There's a decline in ice cover from 73 to 2010 of up to 70%. And there's a consideration that within the next 30 years, we could typically see little to no ice cover on Lake Superior. And when we think about our lakes, they really are the climate engine for our region. They really are what drive our regional experience of whatever the global change is. So it's so important that we watch these lakes and we understand the way that they're responding to changes in our climate. But why do we care about climate change anyway, right? I mean, this is just kind of nature out there, a force that maybe we could control. But when we think about it, the way climate impacts us, it impacts everything. And I think that's really what Wendy was touching on, whether it's the city or it's the lake, it's our governance. When we think about climate, it affects the way we live, the way we work, and the way that we play in our communities. And it transects all of these sectors. So it's so important to understand it and understand how we can be preparing for the change and also being stewards so we can mitigate what may come next. Driving a little more deeply here about lake levels. Oh, I moved away from the mic. I was joking and I said the only thing that's more contentious or difficult to discuss than climate change is lake levels. And it's true, they're tricky. Understanding the relationship between climate change and lake levels continues to be a challenge for the scientific community. The message that we're really trying to communicate right now is that in the long term, we anticipate a gradual decline in lake levels. But in the planning period, in the midterm, variability is the name of the game. That we anticipate levels going down, but we still will continue to see high lake levels, as we've experienced so recently, where we've seen a 13-month period that included the highest and lowest levels on record. And we need to have our systems, we need to have our shipping routes, our ports, the way that we interact at that lakefront prepared for this variability. To that, when we think about potential impacts on shipping, when we think about an inch loss of water depth, that can reduce the cargo capacity tremendously. This is a wide range, of course, 50 to 270 tons. It depends how big the ship is, what it's moving, etc. But obviously, the lake levels have a tremendous impact on the way that we use the shipping infrastructure that is our region. On the other hand, with less ice on the lake, we see those shipping lanes being open longer, but all of that requires adaptation of our policies, of our governance. Are we prepared for a longer shipping season? Are our ports prepared? If the lake levels are going down, what does that mean in terms of dredging and maintenance and serious considerations? So being prepared for variability, being prepared for a governance structure, a policy, and a business model that can be flexible and respond to the change that's taking place on the lakes. As I said, precipitation changes are really the calling card for climate change in our region, and of course, that precipitation leads to this flooding and these challenges of stormwater management, which we've touched on already. Across our region, we have these legacy cities, and they have legacy infrastructure, and we can ask ourselves, not just, are we going to be prepared for climate change, but is your infrastructure prepared for the change that we've already seen? And so often it isn't. We're seeing more severe storm events. We're seeing the combined sewer overflows. We're seeing nuisance flooding and standing water, and all of these things really combine, and they lead to the outflows. They lead to the algal blooms. They lead to the fish kills. They lead to the beach closures. And the systems are so intertwined, and being prepared to look at the conspiring impacts and be responsive to those impacts. So more precipitation, but with warmer water, warmer temperatures, and you see these blooms, and you see these health challenges emerge. And so it's so essential that we're thinking about these changes as a system and thinking about our cities and our lakes as an integrated system. But how do we do that? How do we cope with the uncertainty? Because I've shown a little bit about where we've come from and a little bit about where we're going, but this is the picture that we see so often, the hockey stick, right? We see these different scenarios. These are what we call emission scenarios. So they're essentially scenarios of economic development. Do we stay on the same path that we are on now, burning fossil fuels? Do we reduce? Do we actually stay in the middle? And what's really interesting is we see this box as the adaptation space. And this is the space where it really doesn't matter what scenario we're on, because we're going to be seeing the same impacts from our models. And this is the space that extends about out to 2040. We're really in it right now. We are in the moment to be able to adapt to what is occurring and make choices to be able to mitigate where we go, in which one of these paths we eventually end up walking down. An important aspect of adapting to climate change when you're out and you're making decisions in your community is to think about the global story, which is overall warming, overall more convection, more energy, bringing it to the regional, understanding that the lakes are our drivers, that they add a natural variability, and then bringing it to the local. The way that we feel climate is dramatically changed by our land use choice. We have tremendous control over the way that the climate change impacts us. Do we leave that wetland in place, or do we put a parking lot on it? Do we want to be able to help nature absorb the change, or do we want to fight it? And we have a lot of control about the way we experience climate change at that local level. When you engage with climate science, when you engage with climate data, understanding and being willing to say, you know, averages don't really mean a lot for me. An average over the year doesn't reflect the way that I live and work and play in my community season to season. So averages are interesting to scientists, but we need to have information brought to the extremes. So that extreme isn't a climatic extreme. I'm really interested in the tails. I'm really interested in the 95%, but you might be really interested. So when I say there's going to be 5 more days over 95 degrees, that's interesting. People who live in Marquette, Michigan, start seeing hospitalizations at 87 degrees. That's the threshold that matters to them. Knowing what your threshold is, finding out what is the degree, the amount of precipitation that starts to stress your system, then asking for the scientific community to provide that kind of data to you. Make the data work for you, and have it be seasonal. Have it matter to you, not just the big averages, but breaking it down by seasonality. We've developed a rubric in the work that we do that goes through what has changed, what will change, and what are the impacts. But that really helps people to be able to have this conversation because, you know, we all know that we've been experiencing a warmer climate. We know that we've experienced bigger storms, but you can bring the data to that. So often, all we do is offer quantitative data to the qualitative experience that's been had. And then people say, oh yeah, that is where I am. That is the change I've seen. And then you walk forward. Then you say, well, if you believe you've changed this much, now let's go to where we're headed to next. And suddenly, that's much more palatable when people recognize it's not the climate that they used to have. And then what are the impacts? Why does it matter? So this is my new slide, recognizing uncertainty. This is if I tried to map from my house to work. So in the morning, Google is like, oh, it's going to take you 16 to 20 minutes. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to jump in my car. I'm going to go. This is going to be great. But when I want to come home, all of a sudden my way home just became 18 to 40. But I don't stay at work. I'm not like, well, I guess I'm just not going to do anything tonight. I go home. I go home. You act through it. You look at your routes. You find out where are the streets closed. I got Waze. It's, you know, this online community where people say, oh, this street's closed, this street's open. I find a community. I know where my side streets are. I know how I can get from my office to my house. And it's an adaptive solution. And I act. And I go home. And that's so much of where we need to get to, I think. We need to say uncertainty is part of the way that we interact with the world every day, and it can't stop us from moving forward. We need to ask that the research community do better to take the information that it has and match it to service, match it to the community, and that's the space that we try to sit in at the University of Michigan and at GLISA. We try to be that bridge. We try to take difficult concepts and link it to practitioners and listen to practitioners and say that's what research needs to be answering and make it an iterative cycle and a cycle that's built on trust and communication. So, thank you all very much.
Thank you. Well, it's great, John Austin. It's wonderful to be here and contributing to your conference. Cleveland has a special place. My Austin family is from Cleveland. My great-great-grandfather was a carpenter in England and came to the United States when Chicago burned down. He thought there might be work. But he never made it. He met a woman and settled in Cleveland, and he and his son started a carpentry and then construction company, the Austin Company. Some people in Cleveland may have known it, that built a lot of the industrial buildings in America and the world. And sort of we're part of this storyline of this Great Lakes region, which is the economic powerhouse that really drove tremendous wealth creation, job creation for so many years. And you know, my work, as was alluded to, has really been about, I married a Michigander and have looked at our region and tried to help us figure out where are the jobs, where is the future economy to help us adapt and replace this incredible set of great industries that we were the crucible of and the inventor of in that kind of drove the 20th century. I mean, when you think about it, the oil industry, the auto industry, the chemical industry, the steel industry, I mean, this is what powered our region. Cleveland and Detroit were the Silicon Valleys of 100 years ago. And it just occurred to me, we are uniquely responsible for this climate change phenomenon, which, I mean, come on, we invented the car, we invented the mass production economy at scale that was copied around the world and changed the world economy and drove people up to our region, and we're both affected by this, and we are the ones who got to figure out what to do about it and put this innovation horsepower and our creativity to work both for our own interests and beyond. And as was alluded to by Wendy, I've been focused on what matters to the economy of the future, clearly education, helping everybody here. You didn't need an education to work in these great machine shops and factories. That's no longer true. So we got to get better educated, and we have to be the innovators that solve these big problems, and we have the horsepower, including around water and climate change adaptation, that can be an engine for new economic opportunity, new job creation that is centered in this wonderful region. Because the world does need new solutions to energy, water, food, mobility. How do we solve global problems in these domains much more sustainably, much more efficiently, much more durably in terms of using and not abusing, because this great empire that we built of the industrial factory economy abused our natural assets profoundly, and how do we lead in the revolution to use everything and our natural assets much more sustainably and not wreck this beautiful planet and our beautiful section of it here. And the world needs these solutions, and we can be the ones providing it and create new jobs and economic opportunity if we leverage the assets that are here. And there are lots of green and blue solutions. I talk about the green and blue economy, the sustainability work of the future as the growing sectors and industries. Light touch. So, you know, from cleaning wastewater to changing our auto industry. It would help if we taxed carbon and gas to drive us forward. The little thing on the left, on the lower left, is a wonderful Cascade Engineering in Grand Rapids, big auto parts maker. You look under the hood of your car, you see plastic auto parts. That's what they did. Their CEO, Fred Keller, took them into. This is not the work of the future. The work of the future is sustainable products. They make plastic solar panel holders. They invented this simple plastic water filtering device to filter and make fresh water for the developing world with local ingredients, solve huge global problems with the competencies that made us great in our great industries, as 60% of the folks in the developing world are in hospital because of waterborne pathogens. These are real wonderful things that we can provide solutions and create new economic activity and innovation, building on the strength that made us great. Here's another one to think of coming out. I think it's the University of Michigan. A lot you can do with a 10-watt solution to help the third world learn how to make energy, clean and disinfect water. So a point is we have unique assets here. The innovation horsepower in our institutions of learning and research, which are clearly well represented today, in our companies to be the problem solvers, new technology developers for these new products and services. And we just have a beautiful physical plant if we animate our natural environment and if we make communities that are attractive places to live, work, and play. And we clean up the mess that we made from the industrial era, and we deploy green infrastructure, we have sustainable transportation systems, and we get people out of cars, and we have local food that's available to feed the poor. This double up bucks is the subsidy that food stamp takers in urban communities can get fresh local food, and get double the amount of their food stamps. These are the kinds of solutions that make much more vital, interesting, attractive communities that are part of this new sort of sustainable green-blue economy that we need to deploy. And so at the center of this is water. It's essential for life, as we're reminded. I mean, I sell this blue economy vision around the region, water and water innovation, and it being a beautiful place with our water that's available to us to enjoy and for lifestyle. But Flint really put a spanner in my sort of blue economy rap about Michigan being the place that's doing all this. It's a reminder that it is first essential for life, for everything, and we have to attend to that. But it's also essential for everything that we do, all our work that we do, all our communities that are built, all our industry that we invent. And as you know, without it, you get things like the Aral Sea, where you clearly grew cotton and destroyed the natural environment. But it's also more valuable, and I just want to help us understand this. We use and abuse water at scale, and the water use in our work is still a big source of jobs and economic advantage for a place that has the ability to use water sustainably. We have lots of water, but water is so much more valuable as a magical backdrop for life. I mean, people like to be near the water. Why do you think people go to the coast? Why would they pay more to look over the water if they have a hotel room or an office? Places to enjoy the sunset. Water is magical, and we're connected to it, and we want to be near it. And so this is sort of beginning to frame what is this blue economy and how does it contribute to new economic development and jobs in this region, and how can we accelerate its growth, including solving problems related to climate change and adapting to some of the changes that Elizabeth described that maintain this water asset for our economic development purposes. So just sort of intuitively, we always talk about this Great Lakes region. We're so lucky we have all this fresh water, more than in any other place on earth. That must be worth something, right? And we often don't think about, though, our waterfront real estate is amazing. I mean, we have one of the greatest coasts, freshwater coasts, the only big freshwater coast, which is 11,000 miles long. Michigan has 3,400 miles of it. I mean, there's only so much waterfront real estate on beautiful water frontage on Great Lakes. And inland lakes and other waterfront property and real estate is an amazingly valuable economic engine. We also have the world's leading centers of research and education. We have 20 of the top research universities in the world in the Great Lakes region. As you know, research university, that's more than any other place. The West Coast has 13. The East Coast has 15. I mean, these are the engines of research, discovery, innovation, new technologies, new business, talent generation. We kick out more talent in this region. We often lose our talent, except for some places that are keeping it or attracting it back, like Pittsburgh. But, you know, the Clevelands and Michigans have been losing our talent. But what an engine. I mean, every great sector, whether it's IT or healthcare or clean energy or this coming water technology, comes out of the interplay of research and new business development. And so we have this unrivaled asset. We taught the world how to feed itself from our institutions. Now we need to teach the world and have it hubbed here, how to solve these big problems in water, energy, food, and mobility. And we can leverage this incredible horsepower that is, again, represented in this room today. And we know water makes a wonderful, magical place to play, enjoy, backdrop to life. Again, if it's available to us, if you can get to it, if it's not toxic, if it's not on fire. You know, we had 4 rivers that caught on fire in the late 60s. Can anyone name all 4? The famous Cuyahoga one, right? But the Buffalo River caught on fire, the Chicago River caught on fire, the Rouge River caught on fire. That was obviously a moment was like, hey, wait a minute, this reality of our backdrop for life here, we've kind of wrecked it. We need to restore some attention to what this natural, beautiful place needs to be, and we need to not wreck the planet that is so fragile as we began to see it from outer space anew, this green-blue planet. So that's, I preempted my next slide. Water as a magical backdrop to life, to be near it, to enjoy it, to access it, to have new economic development around it, including keeping pristine places, doesn't work if you can't be near it and it's on fire. I mean, that's the sort of fundamental. And we learned in this Wendy alluded to this Healthy Water, Strong Economy report. We learned clearly that the Great Lakes Restoration Game Plan, $20 billion, a dozen years ago, to clean up the Great Lakes, to clean up the areas of concern, to restore marshes and wetlands that were buffers for the systems. All of these good things we needed to do to restore the health of the lakes was going nowhere in Congress because it was perceived this is an environmental play. We turned it in with this economic impact study that we did with Brookings into a job engine and economic development agenda. So this became, it's $3 to $1 invested. You get conservatively, every dollar you invest, you get 3 in long-term economic development benefits, job creation, which includes billions of dollars for these regional communities. And it was then communicated as this is about jobs and economic development, which it has to be to have political traction in Michigan, in Ohio, in Wisconsin, in Minnesota. Understanding these are the swing states in 2008. We got Obama and McCain to take a pledge that they would follow through on Great Lakes restoration, and that's what's happened. We've now seen dollars flow to restore and clean up and projects to reanimate the clean water and connections to it around the Great Lakes region. So, okay, well that's all nice and fine. What does this really add up to in economic development benefits in terms of a blue economy? Well, we're framing the blue economy as I think we've framed it to understand it. There are 5 ways that water and water innovation drives jobs and drives new economic development. 2 are sort of the legacy ways. I mean, this region was opened up as we transported the bounty out and sold it. We also used our water at scale. It powered the mills. It was the lubricant for the heavy industry, as you can see all around us. But the emerging ways that are the most powerful are the new emerging products and services in solving water problems, in being the hub of blue water research and innovation, problem solving and talent generation for the world, and in having physical blue places, places that reconnect to their water. And we put numbers on this. If you look around the Great Lakes region, this is not the big contributor to economic development and jobs, our shipping and our commercial fishing, but there's still over 200,000 jobs that are connected to that in the Great Lakes region. And again, affected by changes in climate patterns for good and potentially for ill. This is still the biggest way we benefit by or have jobs because all these industries located here, agriculture, rich farmland on the interior, big water user, big water abuser. The heavy industry, was here along the lakes and rivers because you had access to water. That was the defining element for why this region grew as it did. And there's still 5.3 million jobs that are connected to these heavy water using sectors. Now, all these sectors are, among them, manufacturing more than agriculture, are now leading the way in terms of how you use water sustainably and don't wreck it and pollute it and use it much more efficiently, which is also the new business model and the new ways that these sectors can be competitive and even remake their brand. I mean, we see GM here, but Ford Motor was recently noted as the greenest company on the planet, largely because they reduced their water use 80%. And are driving their own, sustainable business model and benefiting from that kind of association that changes the notion of who these people are. And as you know, Ford's one of the ones leading a new mobility agenda, get people out of cars and develop the multimodal transportation systems that are the future of the world. So they're not a car company anymore, but a mobility company. I mean, that's the kind of revolution that is about creating new economic jobs and opportunity, building on our legacy base. So this is still a big piece of this. But the real excitement is in all these emerging products and services, which are, again, trillion-dollar global markets, new technologies to solve global water problems. These range from Whirlpool, one of our legacy firms in Michigan, is now developing with Kohler in Wisconsin, the kitchen of tomorrow that is net zero water use and much reduced energy use. Dow Chemical, which did a lot of damage to the water, is a global water innovator helping save energy and use less water fundamentally through membranes and filter innovations in heavy manufacturing around the world. You know about the green infrastructure, you know about the new systems we must deploy in every community and the way we need to treat water differently and innovate in how we remake our wastewater infrastructure systems. There's new solutions that are about water problem solving that are going to be job engines, particularly if we leverage our great research, corporate, entrepreneurial assets in this space which we have the horsepower to do. Not very many places on earth have the combination of physical real estate with water and innovation engines, world leading. I mean, I teach at University of Michigan too, University of Wisconsin, Ohio State, Cleveland State University. What amazing powerhouses of research, innovation, and talent generation who can lead this revolution as we led the last revolution. And that's the next slide, really, is these engines of research. We looked at Michigan. We've got 9 research university water centers. The big 3 that we have, they did $300 million. They won in water research over the last few years. That's as much as they do for the auto industry. And so if our 18 community colleges and our 9 universities are doing water research, water talent production, from the wastewater technicians to the serious scientists like are in this room who are working on global climate change from University of Michigan and Wisconsin, Ohio State, that's money, that's research dollars, that's spillovers, that's new economic activity, that's more vibrant communities, as these institutions are the hub of, look at what's happened along this streetscape. Cleveland State University is the locus of this part of Cleveland's redevelopment physically, new people, more activity. I mean, these are huge engines of economic growth, which we have, and we can grow them in these areas. As, again, I see Sam at University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, and Milwaukee, as we know, has organized around this type of agenda uniquely. And then we do know the power of water placemaking and lifestyle. It's more than tourism. I mean, when you clean up the mess and you reconnect to your water, you just create more vibrant, attractive communities that have huge economic development, both opportunities and reality that's creating new jobs, new economic activity at this kind of scale around the region. Again, we weren't facing our water. It was the dumping ground. Think of the riverfronts, and the waterfronts. Buffalo's now getting into the game. Detroit's remade its riverfront. You see amazing development of this physical reanimation of water connectivity around the region. So a few years ago it hit me, blue really is the new green. We sort of had our heads around there's a green economy with new clean energy products to make and sell, with every system, every school, every building, every manufacturing facility needing to retrofit to save energy. And a physical dimension, greenways and parks and open space and lifestyle choices. People want to participate in the green revolution. They want to buy products that are made more sustainably. All of this has an analog on the water side with the kind of technologies, services, retrofitting of every system to save water and use it more efficiently, and blueways and water trails and a beautiful reconnection to our water as a fulcrum for new quality of life and communities that people want to stay and live in, not flee, because they're beat up, battered, and the place that are doing the polluters. There's a values dimension for this. I mean, our young people want to participate in solving the world's problems. A great, addendum to that Cascade Engineering story is Christine Keller, the son of Fred. We were on the radio together, and as you can tell, I get kind of hyperbolic about the opportunities here, and she's worse than me. She's like, and there's more. We're not only making these cool save the world products, young people, our young talent at Grand Valley State University, the young engineers and others, they were tripping over themselves to intern at Cascade because they want to work on this stuff. Otherwise, they leave us. The talent, they go to places that are greener, that are serious about solving the world's problems, and there we can work on sustainability issues. This is important, the values message you send as a community. Are you in the vanguard of this stuff? Are you a laggard that's still trying to prop up the 20th century economy, which we've been doing for years, too? Maybe we're past that, but we have to be past it. And when you put the building blocks together, I mean, as I was touring the Great Lakes working on this stuff, Milwaukee was the first place that sort of the business leadership and others there, we talked and they said, look, we're looking at our future. What's our brand? And they were the first to put the sort of 3 legs of the emerging blue economy stool together. Okay, we've got some water research centers. Why don't we grow them? Oh, we've got a cluster of firms that are in different ways in the water technology business. Why don't we grow that? And we are on Lake Michigan and cleaned up our river, which used to be, a dumping ground of the backs of warehouses. And why don't we celebrate and elevate our physical place as a beautiful place to live, work, and play on the water? And Tim Shee, the Chamber of Commerce guy, said, you know, this is probably the most powerful thing we do. When we get CEOs to town, we don't drive them on the roads because our roads are crappy like everybody else in our region. We put them in a boat and drive them around. You know, that's pretty impressive. So they were the ones, and I think at the time, Sammy, you remind me, since I seemed important because I was working for the Brookings Institution, you know, they sort of asked me, is this a good idea, do you think, John, to do this? I said, this is fantastic. I think this is the future for us, and all of us in the Great Lakes can be part of this future. I said, I think, you know, just the scale of like University of Michigan and other places on the research side, we should eat your lunch any day. But they said, you know, hey, you're not doing it yet. So they went on, and now they're a global water center and doing all this thing and percolating new firms very proactively. It's fantastic. And I'm trying to get Michigan nudging more in that direction as well. Grand Rapids, greenest mid-sized city, now doing all these things, setting targets, business leadership. We're going to hit 2030 targets of having our energy use, our water use, get people out of cars, the mobility. They putting the rapids back in the Grand after 20 years of reconnecting that river. It's the business people doing this, saying, and it's not because they're going to sell a few more kayak rentals. It's because downtown Grand Rapids is an even cooler place to live, work, and have a place to have your apartment. You know, this is very powerful stuff. And everybody's getting into this. Cleveland, Buffalo. It's really an opportunity for this whole region to remake itself from the Rust Belt to be this emerging innovator of the coming work and a physical place that's a beautiful place to live, work, and play if we do the things that help it along. And we're seeing some of those headlines now. Look, after what's up in California, they're out of water. Maybe we can be the place that helps transform, solves their problems in water efficiency and everything they do and sell them the products and services to do it. I mean, that's our economic future, is to be that place. We can turn this Rust Belt to Blue Belt. Again, that's why it's so painful for me, this trying to percolate this new work and understanding. And then you said, Flint, oh, we look like a third world country, you know, can't even keep our people alive with water when we're surrounded by the most clean, fresh water on earth. So but this is our future. We need to keep this storyline rolling. As I said, everything has to be retrofitted for water efficiency, water conservation, everything. And we can be the innovators. Johnson Controls, again, their business now is how do you help commercial facilities and manufacturing facilities have smart water and energy systems, you know, and they will make more money by helping deploy those around the country and the world. This is a huge part of our future, and physical places that reconnect to the water and treat it well are so magical and redefine the lifestyle and the reputation and then the physical reality of who wants to live, work, and play in your community and can be a huge proven economic development engine. I won't go over the lessons, but it's basically accelerate all this stuff. You've got to grow these footprints of your research and education institutions. You've got to do the water restoration and reconnecting plan in your communities. You need to support and leverage the innovation to create new business development and embrace this sort of values message. We're the problem solvers of the work of the future here in this region, which is about sustainable everything and clean everything. And then we'll keep our talent, and then we'll create new jobs in the future. And this Rust Belt will become the Blue Belt, and we will totally change our reputation. So thank you for letting me sort of share this insight. There's obviously lots of climate change related work for us to be the innovators of, as well as to go back to fundamentals, like let's be the place, since we created climate change, we're uniquely responsible for it. I mean, it is us. We got to be the ones that solve the problem. So thank you.
Good morning. I'm going to start with my personal connection to the lakes. My dad was a walleye fisherman, and we spent every summer in northeast PA in a small dinghy in the middle of the lake. And we hated it when the fish were hitting, because when the fish were hitting, that meant you weren't coming home, you weren't eating, and if you wanted to go to the bathroom, you had to figure that out for yourself. But for 60 years, he fished that lake, and he would tell us stories of the blue pike and fishing at night for the blue pike. And then the zebra mussels and when they came in and how they changed the bottom of the lake and the different change in habitat and depth that the fish were at in the lake. So I grew up with that oral history of change on the lakes, and I think that maybe led me to my choice of career over time. So, integrated water management. This is a continuum that was done by Rebecca Brown and her group down at Monash University in Australia. And what it's showing is how water management has developed over time in cities. So basically, we started with water supply. After we got water supply in place, we went to a sewered city, wastewater management. Then we started to move into tackling drainage. And now we're at this situation where we're somewhere in between drain cities and waterway cities, where we're thinking about environmental protection. We're making moves in that direction. But what's happened is it's taken us 100 to 200 years to get to that point. And where we want to get to is this idea of adaptive multifunctional systems. So to go from not just thinking linear, but to jumping forward to this idea of a water-sensitive city, or what many people here in the US are calling a one-water city. But we can't take another 150 years to do that. You've heard about how fast the changes are happening. We have to adapt in the way that we move forward so that we're quicker and more nimble. So integrated water management has many names. Some people call it regenerative infrastructure, some call it water-sensitive design, integrated resource planning. Around the world, water professionals call it many things generally, but what seems to be happening here in the US is it's gaining popularity as One Water. And I think this originally came out of the US Water Alliance, but it's a term that people can easily identify with. It's simple. But then there's many visions, and these visions are coming out more from the architects, the urban planners, this idea of how do you think of a city in water? So some of the ideas are cities as water supply catchments. So the idea that if you could capture everything that fell on a city, you wouldn't need to import water. You'd actually have enough water right there. It's just how do you store that, how do you capture it? Cities as sponges. Think of the city as having a big sponge underneath it, and you're trying to fill up that sponge. So how do you infiltrate everything into that sponge so that you don't have flooding, you don't have runoff? Cities as carbon sinks. How do you get enough green into the city that it acts as its own carbon sink? Blue-green networks. John talked about the blue networks. Well, we've been fairly good at connecting green networks. Now we're trying to make the cities into blue and green networks that are interconnected. And I love the last one, which is probably in the last 5 years, this idea of cities as vertical forests. So stop thinking just as buildings as a hindrance, but buildings as the structure that green can grow on. Integration means not just integrating water, wastewater, stormwater, and natural systems. It also means integrating hybrid systems. So gray infrastructure, which is our legacy and which still has a huge role in how we manage water, with green infrastructure. So how do we bring those two together? Integrating across all disciplines. Water has traditionally been very engineering dominated, probably in the last 15 years, engineering and environmental science, but we still have very few economists, social scientists, geographers, architects in the profession. Across scales, we're moving from centralized systems to now doing things from household scale all the way up to centralized. And across institutions, there's a real movement to bring together water, energy, transport, buildings, and urban planners to plan together. The goals that we're looking at as a community is better living conditions, healthier communities, increased biodiversity, improved air and water quality, reducing our urban footprint, empowering our citizens, but also what we're talking about here today of creating resilient and sustainable systems that are so we have reduced floods and we can counter droughts. So who might be involved? To me, there's a real need for urban planners to take a very much more active role in the management of water. Water professionals are not trained to integrate into the urban fabric, and as we move forward, it's the urban planners that can really make things happen. And I think of them as an octopus with many tentacles in all different areas. And there's a magnitude of people that could be involved, but it depends on what you're trying to do. And one of the big pushes on this is, particularly in the Northeast with combined sewer overflows and the push towards green infrastructure, a real opportunity to change the way we design cities, but also decentralization. So we can now do things at very small scales, technologies such as membranes, which we used to have to do at larger scale, we can now do at a building scale, a household scale. So it changes the whole possibilities of what we can do. So, as Wendy mentioned, we just completed a project last year for the Water Environment Research Foundation and the Water Research Foundation to look at how do you change systems. So we have all these technologies, we could do anything, but why doesn't it happen? And so we did a literature review, we interviewed people, and we found 6 key areas where there were barriers to things moving forward. Leadership, planning, culture, citizen engagement, economics and finance, and regulation and legislation. So all of those areas have aspects that are preventing us uptaking new ideas. Oops, sorry. Okay. So when we talk about change, it's not just hard systems as in committees, laws, and regulations, but a lot of what needs to happen is what sits behind that, what we do every day, which is our informal networks, our professional cultures, and our social worlds. That's where change also needs to happen. I'm being slow now. So leadership. It really helps if you have strong champions and leaders. It doesn't, I mean, where you have that happening, you see change happening, but sometimes that's not possible for any number of reasons. But leaders can create a unified vision, and when I worked on Switch around the world, when I worked in the US here, one of the key factors was having a unified vision, having everybody at the table and deciding where you wanted to go. And you need leadership to set the ground to have that vision. So one of the examples is Los Angeles. They now have a One Water LA vision statement, principles, they're working forward, they have a plan. And so that's a first step you can take. Also, we're seeing people rebrand what they do. So instead of being a sanitation authority, a wastewater authority, now we're seeing people say, we're clean water services. We create clean water. And that may sound like blue wash, but it's really important to the community because they have a different perception of what you're doing and more likely to be engaged. And also to your workers because it creates pride in the work that they do. And we need to recruit people to this industry. Just looking at time. In planning, collaborative planning is probably the heart of integrated water management. So partner, partner, partner. We need to get away from this silos of planning, which are inflexible, and we need planning tools that we all can use across different agencies. And that's difficult because we have politics involved too. So for example, in Pittsburgh, we have 83 municipalities in the city of Pittsburgh. Each one of those 83 municipalities has a mayor, a council, and politics involved, local politics. Some are rich, some are poor. So when you try and do things that are integrated, it's very hard with all those different political cycles happening. But we've been successful in Three Rivers Wet Weather has been great in facilitating regionalization in the Pittsburgh region. So facilitators can be very helpful funded facilitators to bring things together. Also, data management is huge in trying to collaborate. So Cincinnati has Project Groundwork, where they're working with where the municipal department is working with the EPA and local universities to bring together the standardization of the data and be able to work together to evaluate green infrastructure. Somehow all my animation went away, so you'll just see it all at once. But planning together, in Switch, we had learning alliances in each of the cities. And we called them learning alliances because we didn't want them to be part of the formal planning structures. Because often if you're part of the formal planning structures, you get all caught up in politics around that and deadlines and such. We wanted people to be able to learn and have knowledge exchange. So we brought together the water, wastewater, stormwater people, along with the urban planners and other NGOs, a lot of different groups in each city. And they went for 5 years. And we realized that it took 2 to 3 years to just have a basic understanding of what each other did before you could even move on to the planning phase. So it's not a short-term process. It doesn't happen overnight. The learning alliances, just for costs, we figured $35,000 for a facilitator for each city each year. So you need funding to make these things go ahead. This STAR Sustainability Community Rating System that I have up here, what I was showing is that water people tend to have their own rating systems, and there's a lot being created for the sustainability of water. But as we move into co-benefits, indirect benefits, it's really important to integrate water into the way that urban planners rate cities. So the red star circled items are the things that water people would generally think they were involved with, like green infrastructure and natural resource protection, water in the environment. But if you think about where we're moving with water, water affects so many things. So it can reduce asthma. It's been quantified that it can reduce heat stress. So it has health benefits. It has recreational benefits. Everything that has a blue check, water will affect that in some way. So trying to overcome this, not bringing water into these evaluations, because it can change the whole way that city planning is done if you think about how water affects that. Culture, knowledge, and capacity. There's a huge resistance to change in the water industry. It's got a lot of inertia. So culturally, changing that is a real challenge. I'm actually thankful of EPA and its mandates. Many aren't, but I think it has fueled a change in thinking towards how we manage stormwater and wastewater. We do still have disciplinary imbalances. As I said, we have a lot of engineers and environmental scientists. When I was working on Switch, I did an analysis of who all our researchers were. It won the grant because it was supposed to be an interdisciplinary project. But when I looked at actually the makeup of our teams, we were 80% environmental scientists and engineers. So the poor economists, there was only 3. And they had to try and talk with this weight of engineers, and it makes it very difficult. You have to have a lot of stamina. So state of Minnesota is addressing this in some ways by revising the revolving fund criteria for putting equal weight to decentralized systems. So, you know, it's very hard when you have a new system. It tends to get a higher risk profile than what you already have, even if it isn't higher risk. And Melbourne Water did a great study where they looked internally at the people in their organization, and they didn't look at just who had the knowledge, but they looked at who had the influence. So who would people come to if they wanted to get advice? And it wasn't always the people that you would expect. So they changed their training program. Economics, I'll be quick so we have time for questions. We need to start using a better triple bottom line. As I said, understanding the indirect benefits, This is a study, the pie chart is a study that was done by Stratus Consulting for the city of Philadelphia, and it looked at where the benefits were of CSO options. And what it's saying, and it wasn't what I expected, is the big benefits are coming from increased recreational opportunities, improved aesthetics, and reduction in heat stress mortality. So by doing green infrastructure, that's where you're getting your gains. Not so much in the water or the energy, but in the physical. I'm like this at home with the TV too. Legislation is a big issue, and some of the things that are happening in this to overcome some of these barriers are a streamlined permitting process. So San Francisco has taken the lead to try, they want to do more on-site recycling in buildings, so containing everything within the building envelope. But that involves the health officials, it involves the plumbers, it involves the building inspectors. And if you're a developer, if you're a person wanting to do this, it's overwhelming because you're dealing with so many agencies and so many different permitting processes that don't match up at all. So they've led this initiative to streamline that whole process, and they've been quite successful. It actually has gone to the White House and been rolled out as a national initiative now. So it is possible. Engagement, as we move towards this local treatment, then there's such an opportunity to engage with our citizens. Water is suddenly becoming very visible. So because it's visible, people automatically get more engaged. As John said, people love water. And so doing things like local rain gardens really raise awareness. We're seeing more embedding of engagement in planning, so interactive design workshops and charrettes on neighborhood scale to get people to put their ideas into what will happen. And this whole idea of learning to speak differently. If you talk to a planner, many of you, how many of you are planners? All right. Well, I don't know how to talk to a planner because you have a whole different language than I have. And I really try not to use acronyms, but you use them too. So it's this learning to communicate and not just gloss over when we talk. So integration doesn't happen automatically. It doesn't happen completely. Where you start depends on what your issue is. If you've got a water supply issue, you start there. If you've got a combined sewer overflow issue, you start there and build out. And you think about how that's connected to different aspects and just start building integration. It can't happen all at once. And you have to have all the right ingredients. So when you're making a cake, you make sure to have those all in place. And for us, it was research demonstrations, having these learning alliances, doing strategic planning. So think about all the different aspects that make up integration and then try and put a plan in place. And the end result is more livable and resilient cities for all. Thank you.
Those were great. We all learned a lot. We have time now for questions of our panelists. And if I could get one of the students that's been helping on this project to come and grab that microphone at the end of the table. Or they all went home? Okay. I think they literally, John, could you come get that microphone, please? Do you have a minute you could help? Or are you in the middle of something else? Can you help? What I need is somebody to if somebody has a question, to raise their hand, you'd give them the mic. Is that all right? Okay. I've been asked to make one announcement. Apparently in their urgency to get you your folder, the table gave one of you a folder that actually doesn't have what it's supposed to have. It has some materials that we're going to use later in the day at the best practices session. So there's some cards and other strange things in the folder. So if you haven't actually opened your folder yet, you're supposed to have a notepad and a program and things like that. And maybe you have something else that looks kind of weird. I don't know. I'm not seeing any takers, but okay. All right, so let's see. I think we'll go to 10:30 till the break. So if our panelists would be willing to answer some questions, if you guys have some thoughts, things that you want to ask them about, now's your shot. This is a great opportunity. These folks are experts in some very, very interesting interrelated topics related to the lakes and our cities. Good, many people, great. Councilman.
Thank you. To whoever wants to, or all three, of the Great Lakes region, what states are at the forefront of addressing the issues that have been laid out this morning? What states and what cities that you could point to as a model city approach?
We've been in the course of trying to evaluate the adaptation activities across, when we say the Great Lakes region, we address from Minnesota to New York, and we also include Ontario. Of course, New York and Pennsylvania get tricky, and Ontario's, let's just leave that out for right now. Toronto, I think, is the vanguard. Toronto and Chicago as cities are the van. When you think about climate change, adaptation, really cities that are big enough to push on that, really the leading edge. When we look at state policy, I feel like overwhelmingly we see a gap. There is federal activity and federal action trying to be pushed around climate change, and then you see people at the local level who are essentially being forced to take action because they see streets flooding and systems faltering. There is a vacuum at the state level, by and large. The exception, I think, in our region to that most notably is the state of Minnesota, which has been extremely proactive in addressing environmental issues overall and has generally been proactive in thinking about climate adaptation. Behind that, Wisconsin was, but that has fallen obviously on really hard times under the Walker administration. Has been very challenging to address climate change throughout the state of Wisconsin. And then you see, I'd say, Michigan, Illinois, Ohio kind of coming along after that. But the state vacuum for policy action is a major concern, and it's a issue when you try to see what's happening at the federal, really empower the local without the state there as the intermediary to pass resources through in an efficient way. It's something that we need to be, I think, addressing.
I would just add some of the cities she mentioned, cities and communities that are organizing around sort of sustainable everything and really putting in place policies or goals or targets that drive it are in the vanguard, including some of the ones that you all mentioned. I would look at states. One proxy is, do they have a robust renewable energy portfolio standard? And some of the Great Lakes states do, and Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, this is a framework to drive clean energy innovation. Our state, Michigan, is a real laggard. It's only 10%, and now they're trying to water it down even more. How can we be the innovators in making the clean energy technologies with our horsepower to make things if you don't set a framework that incents that? And I don't know, Milwaukee on water, but states should be. We've been trying to badger Michigan. We should have the same sort of frameworks on water efficiency, water conservation, water innovation. The places that drive the way they finance infrastructure, the expectations for water efficiency and everything, would be in the leaders on this stuff. And so it'd be great to have more states and communities sort of set those kinds of targets, and that drives, let the businesses figure out how to innovate, and that's new jobs.
I just wanted, coming back to the states too, I've been kind of surprised at, I think most action is happening at the city level. The cities have really taken the charge and gone forward. And the degree that they're doing, how good they are at publicizing it is a question. You know, I think a lot of stuff is happening that isn't getting publicized in cities and in small towns. But places like Philadelphia are great at publicizing what they're doing. So I don't know if one's doing better or another, or if they're just better at getting it into the media. But
On water infrastructure, is
yeah.
that what you're talking about? Yeah.
yeah, and I've been surprised at how many government departments are not allowed to say anything about climate change. You know, they cannot mention it. So that in itself, I think, is an issue.
Yeah, I would tag on that for sure, that we see this model that I will sometimes call adaptation by stealth, and that adaptation needs to happen because of that fact that the systems can't cope with the conditions that are existing. And so, I mean, climate change is being discussed. You know, we have discussions with cities from Dayton to Columbus to Marquette to St. Paul, you know, the Twins, out to Erie. Everyone is thinking about it, but how they are allowed and feel empowered to articulate it is a different question.
Okay, who is next? Right here, and then Peter.
So I'm interested in the barriers to blue economy innovation. A lot of the benefits that accrue to some of these technologies are very public, so we see a lot of planning, a lot of government projects, and it's hard to figure out a way to get the private economy engaged because those benefits are so diffuse and they're kind of high-risk ventures. So I just want to hear the whole panel kind of discuss what they're seeing as interesting ways that they're seeing new technologies pushed out, where the structure of a green economy is a very odd animal from an economic sort of incentivized, how do you innovate and why do you innovate idea. So I just kind of want to hear stories from the trenches, please.
So I'll just name kind of the three dimensions of the blue economy that I think are the coming things. One is how do you lever the sort of physical placemaking? And you know, there's a whole family of things states and communities can do with philanthropic and government dollars that could do more of to clean up and restore water and then run a vision and a plan for water reconnection and multi-use along the waterfronts. And that's, you know, making it part of your community's economic development strategy to reconnect and redevelop, you know, with parks and marinas and open space and sell off some for condos. Elizabeth mentioned Marquette has done a great job of this on the spectacular waterfront. They took redundant properties that were a mess and, you know, kept some for a marina, some for a nice park, sold off the rest for some beautiful condos, public access. Those condos are now with $500,000 on the, you know, Lake Superior waterfront. The other, I mean, just fuel and grow the footprint of the research and education institutions. You know, these places where you educate the talent and are involved in water research of all forms. States can do that. You know, communities can do that. Philanthropy and business can support that. If you expand, basically, I mean, if you pour money into education and research institutions and help them attract more people, more top talent, you are driving economic activity and making this a hub. But more to your point, I think the barriers to how do we get more sort of spillovers and new commercialized technologies out of in the water sector, you know, include let's get the water business folks together with our water research community on targeted things that they want to help solving problems on, a new technology to say, you know, target agricultural irrigation much more profoundly, or you know, how do we develop a new IT-driven water monitoring system for our manufacturing facilities, matchmaking those public-private research partnerships, seeding them, attaching catalytic venture capital, commercialization, early stage capital support systems to those, like Milwaukee and other places have done. You can support the translation of, you know, and the partnerships of what business needs help with from the research community, and then you can subsidize with good catalytic organizations that are sort of market-driven the commercialization of technologies into new businesses.
I work with a group too called Smart Cities Council, and that's the whole IT world. So they're getting into this in a big way with sensors and technology, data management. So, you know, your IBMs, your Ciscos, those guys, they've got a whole advisory group on water. So capitalizing, working with them to try and bring that idea of smart cities and water together is one area. Where we've seen a lot of movement is where you actually force guidelines into place. So require certain things as far as gray water reuse, as far as rainwater collection, and then you get the architects involved and start designing some really cool systems, but you need that force to give them the ability to be creative. So I think those are two areas.
Good morning. Peter Whitehouse. I'm a professor at Case Western Reserve and the University of Toronto, and also the president of Intergenerational Schools International. And I want to ask two questions. You mentioned Ontario, but in general, I'm grateful, particularly with the new government, that we have Canada on the Great Lakes as well. So I wonder if you could address the international dimensions that will impact us here further south. And the other is in terms of engagement. I think to engage youth, kids, natural systems thinkers with elders, this kind of 7 generations kinds of approach is very valuable in this space. I'm speaking personally, so my question to you is, what are you doing specifically to bring those intergenerational voices into engagement processes?
So in terms of the partnering on the Canadian side, we are really lucky as one of NOAA's RISAs that we're part of our mandate is to work in Ontario also and to be binational. We could get kind of into the climate nitty-gritty. Precipitation's greater on the Canadian side. It's very interesting that way. You know, it's great. Having the government change in Canada, I think, is going to have a tremendous impact on the work that can get done there. I mean, obviously, just the name change of the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change now, and our assumption is that with the name change, there will come with it some support to see climate change get brought to the forefront again. I'll be honest, there's been some tremendous losses, and it's something that I think is good for us to be aware of, that the Harper administration shut down weather stations in Canada, and there's been a shutdown of monitoring stations that will never be recovered. So we don't have as good historic information on the Canadian side because those stations aren't there. And when you stop keeping a record, you can't go back and put a new record in place. And it means that we can do projections forward across the region, but much of our data, when we show it, we don't show the US and the Canadian side together because our data isn't as strong on the Canadian side, and that is something that we all need to be aware of, that maintaining these weather stations, maintaining that resource is essential if you want to have a good record, and we've seen the impact of that not happening on the Canadian side. It is really interesting. We bring together cities from across the region, and I think there's always a lot of learning opportunity. Ontario is such a different space population-wise. It's growing. The cities are growing. Toronto, obviously, expanding, and there's a lot to learn when you bring folks from Toronto, and we work in the York region, we work in Peel, we work with Ajax and Durham, and you bring them together and they talk with folks in Cleveland and Detroit and Dearborn, and they're so different and so close. And so they can learn a tremendous amount from each other. Just briefly on the generations, we work with probably a dozen tribes, and there's not a group that's more, I think, aware of the intergenerational connections, and that, obviously the Native American tribes across the region really do think in 7 generations out. They also really see climate change as a tremendous threat because they can't move. Their resources are set in place. They are set in place. And so how do they evolve their culturally significant resources, and how do they kind of gird for these changes when they're not able to move themselves, and they're certainly not going to move what is meaningful and so essential to their being. And so those discussions become very fruitful when you see the older members of the community come together with the youth and explain why the loss of wetland is so significant. And I find that more, I don't know, more moving and frightening than even the, the CSO or the hard infrastructure discussions.
So in the work we've been doing, actually, when we first released this Brookings Great Lakes sort of economic framing paper that Hunter Morrison and many others helped with at the Chicago Fed some years ago, Georges Riou, the Canadian Consul General, was there, and he said, "Great work, but you sort of forgot Canada." And so I said, well, help us. We just don't have access to you. So the second one, the vital connection that was mentioned, baked in the Canadian side. And it's the same sort of economic storyline, tremendous assets on the Canadian side, great research institutions. McMaster is a leader in water in Toronto, and, companies and entrepreneurs. In fact, Ontario had a big blue economy initiative, I don't know if they still do, which was mostly about trying to percolate new business development and support that in water technology. And certainly the physical real estate, is similar with outdoors and waterfronts. And I think one challenge is, how do we have a binational Great Lakes restoration effort? We have it on our side, but the water like commingles. So can you get it towards a binational Great Lakes restoration agenda? And even it would be great to have a Great Lakes restoration or coastline development agenda for how you can leverage that whole arena. Binational things are big, heavy lifts that require, a focused political champion and a lot of political capital to accomplish anything. Witness the Great Lakes Compact. The intergenerational stuff. Getting young people, and we're trying to do it in education, to do hands-on learning in science as we help them learn science, but also get them out using our water and Great Lakes as the laboratory by which they do that is, a very powerful way. And the more of that we do, they get connected, they get understanding, and they learn that there's things that they can work on in this space, and that's a big piece of the equation.
My name is Patrick Sweeney. I'm interested in moving on with the technology. It seems that each time a community spends $100 million in a bond issue to improve the water quality, a new technology comes around that's a little quicker, a little more efficient. We have about 300 water companies in Ohio doing various things within that technology. Are we harnessing anything about the emerging technology? What's hot, what's new, what's coming? The academicians have it in their laboratories. Nobody knows about it. What firms are moving? I think that's really a necessary component of discussing the future of water. I mean, the development of waterfronts is real pretty, but the substance of the water is still dirty. How do we move that forward?
From my perspective, there's huge, the technology needs to come, and there's lots of applications that are desperately needed as you look at just take scarcity. As with climate change, scarcity is going to be whipsawing all over the place, and that's why every place has to have fundamental, new regimes to use water more efficiently in everything. And so there's tremendous amounts of technology that can help solve that problem and new businesses to grow in this space. And people see it as trillion-dollar global markets. The question is, how do you accelerate this region's participation in that so that we're not marketing ourselves as a water-rich region, move here because you can use and abuse the water. But we're saying, no, California, and don't steal our water from the Great Lakes as your solution. California and Arizona, we can help you deploy the systems and solutions in agriculture, in your offices, in your communities that help you basically fundamentally use a heck of a lot less water. And our firms and our innovators at our universities working together can deliver those solutions. Some already are. So it's more what we were talking about earlier with Derek's question. How do we accelerate our public-private research leadership and in being that innovators, and what are the tangible ways to fuel that fire so that we're the ones benefiting from exporting services and products. I mean, Limnotech is a good example from University of Michigan. Limnotech got going with academics spilling out of the University of Michigan as ecosystem engineers, cleaning up the Great Lakes. Now they're cleaning up and restoring ecosystems all over the world and getting paid to do it, and deploying more engineers hubbed in Michigan. So how do we accelerate, can one, through public policy, my bent, that kind of activity?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that there's quite a few technologies out there that we know will work, but getting over the risk factor and getting the operators comfortable and trained. So there's a big need for operator training so that we have comfort in new systems. And I think universities can play a role in that. In outreach, there's a need for new consulting skills. So I went to a green infrastructure event, and they had a huge display floor, and there was only one person there with plants. Everything else was really hard infrastructure. So that's, I think, thinking about what does that technology mean. It's not always gray type things. It is how do we learn about all the green things and get the landscape architects and the agriculture people involved and figure out what that means in the way of money.
Frankly, this is one of the, I mean, again, on local levels, you see places like Milwaukee that are organized around this and facilitating some of it very purposefully. I continue to be frustrated because part of the recommendations in my Michigan Blue Economy report was governor, state, let's support those kinds of public-private partnership, research partnership building, seed them, support the catalytic early stage capital, support organizations that can subsidize what they find, but it takes, again, political leadership that sees the economic opportunity, which I think is vivid. Like, there is a lot of money to be made, a lot of new jobs to be created in this space, so let's make that a priority for policy incentives. And the way you, as I think others know better than I, the way you frame how anything needs to be built can be a huge driver of new innovation and new businesses. And the way you set goals as a community, as some are, by 2030, you're going to have our water use, have our energy use, have our carbon emissions use, and that drives a lot of business activity to deliver those solutions.
I'm Sudhir from Global Quality Corporation. And so my comment/question kind of builds upon the previous question, but takes it kind of at a more national level. Just as a background, there is a whole smart cities effort underway through NIST, and actually Cleveland Water Alliance is, we are engaged in a dialogue. But the whole theme behind that is having action clusters to address resiliency. And the action clusters, the idea is technology will be brought together, cities will participate, get working solutions can be deployed. This is the second round of the action clusters. I'm leading one of the action clusters where the municipalities and Cleveland Water Alliance and other, only the innovative, to say this, are engaging in the dialogue. Just as a background, in the funding that went from the White House and the Envision America Smart Cities, if you look at which were in water, about only 5 to 10% of those action clusters were actually in water. Rest were in transportation, parking. So my frustration was, we are all here because we love water. And so my daughter asked me, so you do this stuff, why aren't you in social networks making more money with the IT stuff? I said, well, I love this stuff. But my frustration is we recognize the value of water, but at a national level, and even to in the extent seeing some of these action clusters, when the funding has gone to, more funding goes to finding a parking space rather than cleaning the water. So, and then at least in this new action cluster, apart from mine, there are 2 others, and out of the team of 40 action cluster, maybe now there are 3 devoted to water. So my question is, how do we raise the opportunity of leveraging smart technology sensors, which are not going to solve the problems directly, but people working with those technologies are going to get us to this blue economy. And so a lot of thoughtful comments came from all 3 of you, if it's climate change and changing the science. So my question is, how do we get at the national level, raise the awareness that we need to get this smart into water and get more attention from the national politicians, state officials and local are obviously driving it more. How do we get the national to think more about water, not just air?
Well, I think you named one of the big vectors. If the nation said we want to drive and support water innovation like we're spending money to subsidize research in health innovation through NIH or clean energy, which we put a lot of stuff in, you would generate, I mean, people respond to that, and these people in this room and others would create all sorts of cool, new, groovy things as they do, down the street at the Cleveland Clinic and, with NIH dollars. So making a federal priority of water innovation, water research, basic research, there's no substitute for funding basic research, and people create all kinds of cool stuff that turns into new businesses.
Yeah, I think also just being clear on these benefits that water gives that go beyond water that we traditionally think of as benefits. I think being able to articulate that in a language that people understand would be powerful, and we should get better at that. I think we need more marketers involved, and we need more business people, because urban planners and water people aren't good business people. And I have a story from Australia. It's just a short one, but we needed to do water efficiency. So Sydney Water put a $150 rebate on front-loading washing machines. Because they did that, the retailers moved those front loaders to the front of the shop because they were about $400 more than a traditional washing machine. So they moved them to the front of the shop. They got enough uptake that it actually made it economical for the front loader manufacturers to move to Australia to start manufacturing front loaders. And that brought the price down to the same as the traditional machine. So it completely transformed the market, but it wasn't because of anything beyond a rebate and retailers and manufacturers. So sometimes we overthink things, and maybe we just need better marketers in this business. But I was in biosolids for years, so selling shit was tough. So I always said we needed better marketers.